Today on Smackey's Garage, we're going to be changing out the wheel bearing on our 2015 Audi. This is going to be the same as a lot of the different Audis when you're looking at the B8s, B8.5s, and it's probably going to be similar to some of the Q models as well. A lot of them share the same wheel bearing design. So we're going to walk through step by step on how to take this out and how to change it. Now the first thing we're going to have to do on this project is to expose the wheel lug nuts. Now, unlike a typical car, this actually has covers on the wheel lug nuts that took me some time to figure out. So we're gonna have to take these lug nut covers off first from a tool that comes with every car. After we do that, we need to pop out the center cap here to get access to the main large axle bolt, which holds the axle into place in the bearing. Now, in these modern Audis, the tool to take it out is actually in here with the spare tire. So we can pull this out. Spare tire mat. It's actually right here. I've used it recently. So this is a tool that we're going to be using. And to get it, it actually lives underneath this here, inside the toolkit, to put the spare tire on. And the reason why it's back there is because if you do get a flat on the side of the road, you do need to take off the lug nuts to get the tire off. So we're going to go ahead and use this. Now this is a simple enough tool where you put it in and then you pull them out. If you get stuck and you don't have one of these tools or you can't find it, you can always use needle nose pliers. Now these bolts here are going to be 17 millimeters each. We're going to loosen them, then we're going to jack the car up. We need to actually take this cap off. And the easiest way that I typically do it is from the other side, just so that I don't damage anything. But we need to access the hub bolt behind here. Now I'll use one of these hockey puck looking things, which essentially just cradles the pinch welds, and that's what I'm going to use to lift it up into the air. Now there could be a chance where your wheel actually is stuck to the hub, which does happen, and you could put some grease on here so it doesn't happen next time. So what I like to do is take a rubber mallet and I'll hit it from the other side so that it comes out. All right, now that I have that off, I'm actually gonna put this back on with the hub bolt in place because we need to loosen that hub bolt and it's not gonna be easy to do. So we need to get these back on and get the car back on the ground so the wheels don't spin. I'm only gonna put 2 bolts on for this because I'm not gonna put the full force of the car on it and I'm not gonna move it. Now we get to take off this axle bolt. So it should be around 150 foot-pounds. So we're gonna use this long breaker bar with the tire somewhat touching the ground so it won't spin. So I'm gonna loosen it, but I'm not gonna pull it all the way off. This is a 19 millimeter hex, so it's pretty big. I think I was saying, you need a breaker bar for this. Now we're not going to take it all the way off, but we are going to loosen it. But we are loose now. One of the things I really dislike about this car is the lack of jack stand spots. So figure out where you want to put a jack stand. Do not get underneath the car if there isn't a jack stand under it. So I do have one under an A-arm, plus I have this, which I'm leaving up. You know, there's probably better spots for jack stands if you can take everything apart back there, but you know, there really isn't a spot that's easy for me to get to. So I'm working off that one. Make a decision if you're doing this yourself where you want your jack stand point to be. But now we have to take off the brake calipers. So both the brake calipers and this need to come out. So I'm going to take this Torx bit out first, then we're going to take off the brake calipers next. So this is a T30. All right, so it's coming down and it didn't break. Now, if you go to my channel, you're gonna see that I do have another video on installing new brakes. So all this stuff came out and I put on new brakes and pads because these are starting to get pretty corroded. But now with that out, we know we can take out this. And to do that, I'm actually gonna turn the wheel all the way just to get some more room and clearance back here to take off the 2 bolts that are holding the caliper bracket on. So from this, we're gonna take off the 2 caliper bracket bolts. So there's one up here, and then there's one more all the way down here. Now the goal is to take off this bracket here so that we don't need to take out the brake pads, and we'll save that for another day. Now those are gonna be a 21 millimeter, so taking this, I'm also gonna use this giant breaker bar to take those off too. Now with these off, the caliper is gonna come loose and fall, so we need to find a place to hang it. So I like to use these hangers, which I purchased off Amazon. All right, hung up in place, not gonna fall. Now here comes the fun part. So you can see that this is obviously pretty well corroded, and it's probably gonna be pretty well corroded into this aluminum piece here. So we need to soak it and hope we can get it out. So on each backside of these, there's gonna be a T12 or a triple square bit that we're gonna be using to loosen these up. So, I know, it doesn't look great with how corroded they are, but we're gonna do the best to get them out. So this is the T12 that you need to take the bolts out. Each one of the bolts will look like this. They're one-time use only. So with this, we're gonna try to take it out. You need about a 6-inch one to get by everything. Now the worst thing that can happen in this scenario is you strip a bolt, which I of course did. So this one right here is stripped. So needs to get drilled out. You can kind of see it back there. It's not working anymore. So I got everything else somewhat loose, but this one I'm gonna have to drill out. Now to get to it, I can either take a drill from the back, or I can take a slide hammer, hit this out right here, drill from this side. I think I'm gonna start with the slide hammer side to see how I do. Now the idea here is I'm gonna pull this hub out of the bearing. Okay, so we have the axle now free. Up in there, it's kind of jammed because of the angle of this. Then I get to drill this apart and take it out. I ended up cutting this with a cut-off wheel, drilled through it, see if I can get it close enough to being broken off. And now I'm gonna try to use the slide hammer to rip this out, because this, like the other side, doesn't want to come off. All right, so I ended up pretty much cutting this almost all the way down, but you know, I think we actually have success, and I can see it moving some. It is, okay. So that is gonna come out now, which means I can go back to slide hammering. Now what's holding this in is essentially the ring around the outside. So I mean, if I heat this up, this is gonna expand, so I really need to heat this up. But this is so thick that I really need to heat it up a lot. So I'm gonna try the slide hammer a little bit more. I can see that it is starting to crack a little bit, so there is some space. So I just gotta keep hammering at it. So it is coming. It's hard to see, but there is a slight gap there that I'm pulling through. Just very, 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 very slowly. All right, so we made some good progress. That is out, but you can see all the corrosion around the outside of that from the wheel bearing. And that's exactly why it was stuck in there. So all this needs to get cleaned up before anything goes back together. So all this needs to be scraped out, and after we do that, we'll put some grease in it just so that it'll go in easier this time and we won't have this issue again. All right, now with that cleaned up, I'm gonna add some grease to this. So I'm gonna grease around the edges here before I put the new bearing in. So that magnetic ring that we were looking at for the ABS sensor before, so it's right here. This is what it's gonna be, not so much contacting, but sending a signal to. When we look at the hub over here, this side had to be out, so the magnets would essentially fly by that, so the ABS will work. Now when I replace this, I always buy the hub and the bearing, and then I end up pressing it in, because You know, situations like today happen more often than you think. Now you are going to have to press these in. You need to make sure that the outer ring, which is magnetic, is pointing inwards to the car so that it can make contact with the ABS sensor or the Hall effect sensor there. So that's one thing you need to watch out for. Now you can use a magnetic sheet just like this one to actually look at the magnets on the other side of it. I'll link this one in the description below, but I found it coming in very handy for this project. You can do it with a vise, but I'd save that as a last resort. Now we can go ahead and put this together. Now we're going to install these, we're going to tighten them down diagonally. So starting top left, bottom right, top right, bottom left. You can go however you want diagonally. All right, now all these need to be torqued down to 59 foot-pounds, which gotta have a torque wrench that'll fit in here to do that. So after you torque them to 59 foot-pounds, you're supposed to turn them another 90 degrees. Just one. Now that they're all torqued down and we've moved them an extra 90 degrees, we can go ahead and put the brake rotors back on and then the brake caliper. So if you haven't seen it yet, I actually put some new brakes on this car, and that video should be live to about a week ago. So go ahead and go check that out. Now we're gonna put this big bolt back in. But we're not gonna tighten it down all the way up because we need to have the car on the ground to do that. Okay, with that on, now we're gonna put the calipers back on. For these, I always start with the bolt on the top because you can see that one and you can just pivot this to the right location. Now these ones are going to 145 foot-pounds. So, like before, I'm going to torque these down. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to snug this up before we put the wheel on. And then we're going to get the wheel on the car, then tighten it up the rest of the way. Now you notice I left this off because as soon as I get this on the ground, I'm going to go ahead and torque that down. And that'll be the last bolt we have to do. Now for this nut, we're going to 147 foot-pounds, and then we need to turn it another 180 degrees. 147. Okay, hit that. Then I'm going to do another 180. Nope, not getting there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to tighten up all the lug nuts, and I'm going to take it for a test drive. All right, so back from the test drive, everything worked very well. There's no more noise coming from the right front wheel. So it was the wheel bearing that was the culprit. Replacement, now everything's better. Now this goes to show one thing when you're working on these cars is you're always in for a surprise, something might break. So having the right tools is incredibly important. I'll link the tools that I used in the description below. It's something good to have on hand while you work on these vehicles because, like I said, something always breaks, something's always corroded, and you end up having to use extra tools and a lot more time than you planned. Thanks for tuning in this week on Smackey's Garage. I'll see you next time.